All right, let's get rolling here. So again, this is the webinar on portfolio analytics and how to spot actionable trends in your bookings using your own historical data. My name is Monique. I'm one of the solutions consultants with PriceLabs. I'm here with Aviva, who's going to be answering your questions in the chat. We will be sending out a recording, like I said. Please utilize the Q&A box to ask your questions. That will really help us record those questions with the webinar. That way people who weren't able to attend but decide to watch the recording will be able to see what questions were asked as well. When a question is asked, I'll go ahead and repeat the question just in case you can't see it, so everyone is able to see what's going on. Nobody gets lost. Yeah, that's it for housekeeping stuff. So let's jump right in. So what is portfolio analytics? Portfolio analytics is a business intelligence tool within PriceLabs that will help you easily and quickly identify what's happening in your bookings, spotting trends for both the future and historical data, and kind of deciding where to take action. Portfolio analytics is available for most, but not all property management softwares. So if you do not see portfolio analytics in your system or in your PriceLabs account, just reach out to our support team and we can give you an ETA on when that might be happening for your specific PMS. But like I said, it is available for most at this point. To get to portfolio analytics, you go into your account, you click on this section right here at the top where it says portfolio analytics. We're going to be focusing first on the KPIs and historic reports. So I'm going to start letting that load in the background. Before we get into it, I'll just go over a quick little agenda. Before we get into the actual tool, I'm going to go over some of the KPIs and filters that you might want to use. After we go over that, I will go over the KPIs and historic report section, which will discuss like comparing the historical performance against other periods. We'll discuss length of stay and booking window trends, and we'll also discuss how to use the tool optimally when you're managing a large number of listings. So using things like groups and things that you probably already have set up for your dynamic pricing, how you can then utilize those things as well as in portfolio analytics. After the KPIs and historic reports, we will discuss the pacing reports, which is personally my favorite section in portfolio analytics, and how to visualize the evolution of your performance over time using booking curves. So without further ado, let's jump right in. So like I said, portfolio analytics is a business intelligence tool that will easily and quickly help you analyze and react to trends in your bookings. So first, we take all of that data that comes into your account through reservations and compile it into these nice, easy to read charts within portfolio analytics. That way you have a visual to track and analyze your performance and all your important KPIs. It also allows you to quickly identify under and overperforming listings. That way you can make adjustments as needed. So before we actually go into the tool, let's quickly go over these KPIs. You may or may not be familiar with them, but it's always good to have a quick refresher. So the important KPIs that we're going to be discussing are ADR, which would be an average daily rate of your booked nights. So thinking of if you have a 4-night reservation that comes in for a total of $4,000, your ADR is $1,000 a night. Occupancy is going to be looking at the percentage of nights booked out of the total number of nights available in a total time frame. Keep in mind you can view occupancy in 2 different ways, depending on your PMS. Most of them at this point we're showing adjusted occupancy in portfolio analytics, and adjusted occupancy removes blocked dates from that calculation. So that would be the adjusted occupancy, whereas total occupancy is going to include bookings and blocks in that occupancy calculation. The next one that we cover is RevPAR. And think of RevPAR as a combination of ADR and occupancy. The reason why we like looking at RevPAR is because it takes into account both the average daily rate and the occupancy. So like I said before, you have that example of that $4,000 booking of 4 nights. which sounds like a great ADR. However, if that is your only reservation over a 30-day period, that might actually not be a listing that's performing really well. So you would take your ADR, multiply it by your occupancy, and that will give you your RevPAR. The next thing that we're going to take a look at is the booking window. So that's looking at how far in advance bookings are being made. This is important for you to know because you want to identify when your peak booking window or booking season is, not just when your peak season occurs, but when are people actually booking for that season. And then you'll also want to understand your LOS, or length of stay. And that is the number of nights booked for each reservation. And you might see the length of stay and booking window change based on what season or what month we're in. And then the last thing that we're going to have a look at is pacing. And that is how quickly certain dates or timeframes are booking, usually in comparison to prior periods or also in comparison to the market. So if there are any questions, go ahead and drop them in the chat. One of the common questions that I get here is people will ask what a good RevPAR is, but it isn't quite as easy as giving a number like occupancy. Because with occupancy, yeah, everyone wants to shoot for, around 100%. With RevPAR, you need to compare yourself to the market and your historical numbers. Ideally, you would like to be improving year over year with your RevPAR, and depending on your strategy, it will help you determine whether you want to actually beat the market or be in line with it. So when determining what a good RevPAR is for you, it is kind of a personal metric that you need to do a little bit of digging on in order to determine that. All right, so here's where we're going to dive into the tool. So KPIs and historic reports. So the first thing we're going to go over is actually comparing historical performance to another period. So let me jump into the tool. So the first thing you're actually going to see when you go into Portfolio Analytics, whether it's the KPIs or pacing section, is the listing filter. So here's where you can actually start to use some of those settings that you might have from the dynamic pricing portion and apply it into Portfolio Analytics. So you can look at your entire portfolio of listings that are either syncing or even not syncing by selecting by actually just clicking Show Analytics. That'll show you both syncing and not syncing, but then you can actually filter to syncing only by selecting that filter. You also have the ability to filter by tag. If you are using multiple PMSs, then you have the ability to filter by PMS. Group and subgroup is probably the most common, as well as city. If everything is in one area, you might also want to look at break things down by bedroom size, but there's lots of different views here that you can use to filter your listings. I'm just going to go ahead, since I'm in a demo account, I'm just going to click Show Analytics and show you everything. That way all the data populates. And we're just going to give this a moment here. Okay, so you'll see right at the top here, we have all those KPIs that I just went over. And at first, you're going to notice that we show it as trends in comparison by stay dates to previous periods. You also have the ability to change it to booking creation dates. So if we switch it to booking creation dates, you'll actually see that some of the KPIs are missing. The reason why some of the KPIs are missing when we look at these trends by booking creation date is because you can't calculate occupancy for a period when that booking window is indefinitely into the future. Hopefully that makes sense. It's always a little difficult for me to explain clearly. Whereas when we're looking at trends by stay date, we're looking at a clearly defined period. Therefore, we can calculate occupancy and RevPAR. But for trends by booking creation date, which is when that booking actually comes in, then we can't calculate occupancy. So just want to clarify that really quickly. You have the ability to change what date ranges we're looking at. So we have some predetermined ones up here. So this is always going to be the most recent date range. And then you're going to select in here if you want to customize what period we compare it to. So by default, we're just going to have same period last year selected. So whether you choose year to date or this quarter or this month, it's going to automatically adjust the same period last year that we're comparing it to. So moving down to the actual chart breakdowns for the trends by stay date, you do have the ability to change the view here. By default, we show all of these KPIs by month. When looking at a large portfolio, to get a bird's eye view, I prefer looking at things month over month or weekly if I'm in a hyper seasonal market. When you start to dive into the nitty gritty, maybe you're looking at a specific grouping of listings or a specific city or bedroom count, whatever, then it might make sense to dive into the daily aggregation, but you can see it gets a little noisy. Day of week aggregation is also pretty neat because you can easily see if you are in a weekend predominant market. So you can actually see here that most of my revenue comes from reservations that are booked on Fridays and Saturdays. When we look at the total revenue here, we actually see that I don't have extreme seasonality because my high season is essentially most of the year with the exception of January, February, and March. We can see that in years past, I am outperforming. However, I might also want to take a look at, has the number of listings I've been managing increased? So you can actually change the metric for these charts by selecting the drop-down menu here. By default, we're going to show you revenue, RevPAR, occupancy, and ADR. But like I said, we can select any one of these metrics. And if I go to number of active listings, okay, so this is actually great news. For the most part, my number of listings that I've been managing has been fairly stable. So seeing that my last year performance, it's grown, yes, but nothing like we're not seeing a sharp increase. So to me, this indicates good performance, that for the most part, my portfolio is outperforming my previous history. But another good way to spot check it would be RevPAR. So when I switch it to RevPAR, because keep in mind, like I said before, RevPAR takes into account occupancy and ADR and not just like the total revenue. We can actually see that my 2024 was on par. It was ahead for some months, but it was also behind in some months. So this, for a large portfolio, the RevPAR again is going to be a more accurate metric to look at. And again, we show you ADR and occupancy, but you can always switch these metrics based on what you want to look at. Just like our other charts, you can always zoom in on any section here and then just double click to zoom out. And that is not working for me for some reason. There we go. All right. The second section here, we also show the same charts, but for trends by booking creation date. So again, you're a little bit more limited in terms of the number of KPIs that you'll have in this dropdown, but it's still helpful to know. We can actually see here that back in 2023, I had a spike in September for bookings. So back in September of 2023, I had I received a lot more bookings than I usually do for future dates. So something to note. Any questions, please go ahead and drop them into the chat. If not, we're going to move on to the length of stay and booking window section. So these two charts are going to help in setting your minimum stay strategy. There is a link on our YouTube. If you go to the YouTube and just search for PriceLabs minimum stay strategies as well as last minute discounts, it goes over that in more detail. We also have our minimum stay recommendation engine, which can help you with that. But when you're looking at your own performance, you might want to analyze, how far out are people booking and how long are they booking for? And this is the section that will help you do that. So by default, we show your booking window versus the number of booked nights broken down. However, keep in mind this can be skewed. This one, the length of stay versus booked nights can be skewed. And the reason why is because by default, this looks like we get the most number of reservations here. However, 3 to 4 days, that's more days than a 2-day reservation, right? So the total inherently is going to be higher. You do have the ability to change the view from total booked nights to booked nights by booking window and length of stay, and that will give you a little bit clearer of a picture. So now we can see here, like in this chart, for example, 191 nights were booked that had a lead time of 2 to 4 weeks and had a length of stay of 3 to 4 days. So we can see that, yes, the 3 to 4 day length of stay, it gives me my highest number of booked nights. And you can break it down further by looking at, okay, when is that booking window usually occur? And that checks out versus this chart here, because I can see here that my typical lead time is between 2 to 4 weeks, followed by 1 to 2 months out. I know this chart can be a little bit complicated to understand, but if you play around with it a little bit, you should get the hang of it. Again, it's really just telling me, it's essentially the same data, just displayed 2 different ways. And we can see both charts check out against each other, that the most common length of stay is either 2 nights, 3 nights, or 4 nights, and that the most common lead time is 2 to 4 weeks versus 1 to 2 months. That's why I like showing it by the book nights by booking window and length of stay. By default, we show you the last 30 days based on the booking creation dates. You can also break it down by stay dates. So for the stays that occurred during this 30-day period, what was the lead time and what was the length of stay? So pretty much follows the same trend as the booking creation dates, but might be helpful for you to note if you're determining your minimum stay strategy. Okay. If you're managing a larger portfolio, you might really like this listing level metrics chart because this is where you can look to figure out which listings to pay attention to that might be pacing behind. So again, we show you every single listing that you are managing here on a scatter plot, and there's a couple KPIs that you can look at. So by default, we're looking here at this month, the month of January. We're taking the listings occupancy and we're comparing it against the market occupancy. So this market occupancy is hovering for the most part. We see all of the market occupancy is right here between 20 and 40%. But I have some listings that are all the way at the top here that have 100% occupancy. Could be booking. No, here it should be showing us only paid occupancy. I can validate that really quickly using this handy. Why did that go away? Whoops, I clicked the wrong. I can validate that really quickly on the table here that shows the raw data that we use in this chart just by sorting. Yep, so these two listings, it is 100% occupancy and it is paid occupancy. Then we see, we got a lot of listings here in the middle, but they're still all outperforming. Anything above this 40% occupancy line is outperforming that market occupancy. However, we have a handful of listings down here that are under 20% occupancy, and those are the ones that are pacing behind the market. So if I had this filtered down by like group or bedroom count, it might not have as many listings and it might be a little bit clearer on which listings to hone in on, but you can just hover over it and see exactly which listing it is and decide to take action on that. You can change what KPIs we're looking at. So you can change it to the listing ADR versus, I don't know, the listing revenue, if you want to do a little bit of a comparison against yourself. So which listings have really high ADR, but overall low revenue might be an indicator that you might need to make some tweaks to your pricing strategy. Or this one down here, okay, I've got nothing. It's got no ADR and it's got no revenue, so there's nothing on the books. What's going on here? You might want to pay attention to that. You can color code it by city, group, or bedrooms. Just another way to help you easily identify what listings you might be looking at. You can also look compared to, I don't know, what's another way? What's the pickup? Yeah, so like maybe occupancy versus pickup. Pickup being the percentage of reservations that have come in the last 30 days. Cool. Any questions? Please go ahead and drop them in the chat. If you see that any of these listings are pacing behind, for example, if I'm looking at the listing occupancy versus the market occupancy, and I identify like, okay, I want to focus on these listings down here. What levers can you pull? Well, this is where I would go into the listing or into the group and dive a little deeper. Maybe use market dashboards if you have a market dashboard and a custom comp set. If not, using the neighborhood data tab to compare where your prices look against the market. Also looking at your minimum stays versus the market. Are your minimum stays too restrictive? Is your pricing too high? Is it a combination of both? Do you need to pay attention to things outside of your revenue management in PriceLabs and look at things like your reviews and your photos and your listing description? Things like that. Those are the things that I would double check on to see what can I improve in terms of like how to improve performance for the listing. And again, we show all the raw data here. So you can always filter or sort, and then you can always hide and display different columns here. Okay, before we jump into the pacing section, I'll show you this now since we're already here. At the bottom of both sections, you're going to see a little button that says export to PDF. This is really helpful if you are managing other people's homes and you want to give them a little overview of their performance, or if you have to present to maybe your finance team or something, how your portfolio is doing overall. You can generate a PDF of all these charts in Portfolio Analytics. It'll put your logo right on it, your contact information right on it, and then you can either email it or print it and just share it with the team. All right, let's go to my favorite section, pacing reports. And again, I'm just going to click Show Analytics to show the entire portfolio. So while it's loading, the pacing reports are going to help you understand your performance relative to the last year. So pacing is looking at forward-looking data for the upcoming few months relative to last year for future dates. Just so you can remember, we also are going to look at pickup, and the pickup is what occupancy has been gathered over a certain period of time. Both of those are going to be available to you in your pacing charts. So this first section here is the pacing chart. This chart is pretty similar to the neighborhood data chart that you might see, and it's showing the future prices. So if you played around with neighborhood data, you'll actually see that when I pull in, this looks very similar to the neighborhood data chart. It's showing me what my prices are listed at overall, aggregated for my entire account compared to the market. This section will only work if you have a market dashboard subscription. So please keep that in mind. It can be useful to use at certain times throughout the year, just when you're doing an analysis of your performance. Oh, Aviva brought up a good point. Back on the scatter plot that we were looking at, should you need to do in-depth analysis, or actually for anything in Portfolio Analytics, really, you can download a CSV of the raw data for any of the charts to create your own reports. So please know you usually can see that by clicking in this section up here. It's either usually the red box or the 3 dots. Thank you for that reminder, Aviva. I always forget to point that out. Okay, so we can also change the view here and show the data aggregated weekly or daily. And you can look at, the next 1 month if we're looking at daily. Maybe you want to look at the entire next year, or the last 3 months and the next 3 months. So you can do all of that right here. You can also remember the selection by default if you know that you're always going to want to come in here and look at the same metric because you have a certain KPI or time period that you work off of. All right, so the next sections are really useful when you're comparing your own performance, either just to yourself or to the market, so you can determine how you're doing overall. Now, again, I find that having a market dashboard is really helpful here, but if you don't, you can always just look at your own historical data if you have it. So let's see what it looks like when we're looking at our own historical data. So I've just clicked on the market occupancy from last year and this year just to hide it. I'm actually going to zoom back in so that we can look at a little more detail. Also, keep in mind, if you have a custom comp set that you've created, you can use that custom comp set in the portfolio analytics pacing charts as well. All right. So what I'm looking at here is my occupancy for this year, forward looking, compared to my occupancy last year at the same time. So as of today, last year, my occupancy for January 18th was at about 18%. My occupancy this year is pacing ahead by 18%, and I'm at a total of around 36% occupancy. So you can see this is where that term pacing comes into play. If I look a little bit further ahead and I look at the 21st of February, I can actually see that I'm pacing behind by about 6%. Last year, my occupancy was at 16.4% as of today. But this year, we are only at about 10.5% for those dates. So you can very quickly see how you're performing compared to last year. And then you'll probably see a lot of dates that are like this, where you're kind of pacing roughly on par, and there's nothing inherently wrong with that. Again, it really just depends on your own strategy. If you have that market dashboard, you can layer in the market occupancy for this year. So you can quickly identify where you're pacing ahead of or behind the market. So again, this weekend here, I'm pacing ahead of the market, but for my weekdays, it looks like I'm actually pacing behind the market. So the market is the red line. And then I might also want to add in where the market was at last year today. So the market is pacing behind itself as of today for last year. Geez, that added everything in. Why did it do that? I will show you what those are in just a second. Okay. Geez. All right. So my occupancy. Where did my occupancy as of today go? Oh, there it is. Okay. So so to me, this would be a good sign. There are a decent number of dates where I'm actually improving my own performance compared to last year. So that solid gray line compared to the dotted gray line, which is in contrast to the market, which overall seems to be pacing behind itself. So I'm actually improving from last year to this year. A couple other things that you can add here if you didn't see them pop up before. You can add the market pickup, which is, again, the amount of occupancy that has come in over the last 7 days in this case, versus my pickup. So I can actually see I'm picking up a little bit ahead of the market for these dates. Now, this is another place that you'll want to say, like, okay, is that an intended effect, or do I want to stay on par with the market? If so, then maybe if I'm booking up ahead of the market, my prices might be a little bit too low, and it might be a sign that you could raise your prices. Again, depends on your individual strategy, so please keep that in mind. You can also identify when the calendar is available versus unavailable. This is a demo account, so this isn't going to look right. And then you can also look at what the final occupancy for last year was. So let me just, yep. So that's the final occupancy for yourself for last year. Okay, so there we go. So I can actually see last year for the upcoming weekend, I was doing a bit better, but I'm going to outperform the final occupancy for last year. So you can kind of quickly identify like how much of a gap is left to close in order to at least meet or exceed whatever metric you're looking at specifically from the year prior. So we just spent some time on occupancy, but keep in mind, you also have this chart and it works the same way for the ADR as well as your RevPAR. So looking at your ADR versus the market, what are you booking at versus the market essentially? So you can actually see, yeah, there are some dates where I'm priced higher than the market. There's some dates where I'm priced lower than the market. Again, totally normal and depends on your strategy. You can also compare your own ADR to last year's ADR. So again, some dates where I'm priced higher than I was last year, some dates where I'm priced lower. Same with RevPAR. And keep in mind, just click on these icon or these legend keys down here to hide or show the different lines. All right. So any questions here, go ahead and drop them in the chat. Again, I really like comparing to the market here because if you're using a market dashboard and you're also using groups, you'll have an edge over just using the neighborhood data because you're able to look at the aggregated information for your portfolio or group or whatever you're looking at. And again, if you see that the market is pacing ahead of you, then you can quickly identify, do I need to lower my prices? Do I need to be more flexible with my minimum stays? Or if you're ahead of the market, identifying, do I need to raise prices? Can I raise my minimum stay? Is it a combination of both? So again, these things are hyper specific to each of your individual strategies and markets. So can't really guide you on that, but I can give you the tools on how to make a decision regarding it. All right. The last section, and probably my favorite, are booking curves or visualizing how your different KPIs are shaping up and progressing for each month or specific time period compared to the previous time period or years prior. So by default, we are looking at the recent months, as we call it here. So we'll show last month, this month, and the following 5 months. So you'll see December, January, and then all the way through June. We can change that and compare it, and I will show you how. But the way that you read this chart is for revenue. That's the revenue here. So we're seeing how revenue increases as we get closer to the stay date. So day 0 would be the check-in date, and day 0 can be any date that falls within the month that we're looking at. So this dark red line here is for December. So day 0 would be any day from December 1st through 31st for the check-in. Now, let's say that I actually want to see how my December of last year compared to compared to December from the year before. I can change this to custom dates, change the date selection right here. So I click this red box in the upper right-hand corner, changed it to custom dates. I'm going to select December 2024, and it's going to apply to corresponding last year. I'm going to click apply. And I can actually quickly see that overall my revenue increased. Now, again, I know that the number of listings I managed also increased, so I would expect to see an increase in revenue. So what am I going to check next? My RevPAR. My occupancy was roughly the same for the month of December. My ADR was roughly the same, but my RevPAR did increase a little bit. My RevPAR ended up increasing by $3 roughly compared to the year prior. Might not seem like much. However, those numbers can really add up over time. Another nice thing that you can do here is not just look at the past, but you can look at the future. So maybe let's say I actually want to look at how March is shaping up for this year compared to corresponding last year. Now, what you'll see is that the March line here is incomplete because we haven't reached March yet. So this is where we're at. We're about 81 days out from the very last possible check-in day in March. And we can see my revenue is ahead of where it was at the same time last year. Occupancy is ever so slightly behind. My ADR is actually ahead, which indicates most likely those highest demand dates or holidays are the ones that have booked up. My RevPAR right now is pacing right on track with where it was. So this is something that I would want to keep an eye on because I know that I would want to see this curve roughly following the same as it did last year. And if it didn't, and if this revenue starts to fall behind, or if the occupancy starts to fall way behind, I know that that's another indicator that means that I might need to make some changes to my strategy. It is very normal that ADR does not follow this normal curve that the other ones do, because ADR will typically start a little bit on the higher side and gradually go down. And that's, like I said, because highest priced dates and the high demand dates, which are typically the higher price dates, are going to be the ones that book up first. I think that just about covers it. Let me go through my notes really quickly. Again, if you have any questions, please go ahead and drop them in the chat. Otherwise, it looks like we can end this webinar a bit early. Let me just go through my checklist really quick, make sure I covered everything. Portfolio analytics is pretty straightforward once you get the hang of using it. Like I said, my favorite section personally are those pacing charts. So go ahead and have fun with that. And those pacing charts are fun to look at, regardless of how many listings you're managing. So even if you're managing, one listing, or whether you're managing 20 listings, I love looking at the pacing charts because it gives a lot of context to the information that we're seeing for the future, right? So you might feel like you're pacing behind or wondering why you're not getting reservations. But if you go back and look at those pacing charts and compare to the year prior, you might actually see that, okay, well, we haven't really entered a peak booking window for that month yet. So maybe there's no cause for concern. So it's a really good way to validate whether or not your concerns or hypotheses are accurate. All right, well, looks like nobody had any questions. So I'm going to go ahead and end this a little bit early. Yes, we will be emailing the video. It usually just takes a few minutes to process, and then I believe it automatically gets sent out to you from the Livestorm system. If you don't receive it, just ping or send an email to our support team, support@pricelabs.co. They'll be able to get you a copy of that video. Thank you again all for joining. Thank you, Aviva, for being here to help me out on the Q&A. Again, my name's Monique. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, Monique DiLorenzo Pomeroy. I always love hearing from our customers and hearing how PriceLabs has helped them improve their pricing strategy. So enjoy the rest of your day. Happy New Year. We'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.